Celebrating freedom, we explore the history of Independence Day. Revisiting St. Clements Island, we remember the first Catholic Mass in the English-speaking colonies. The New World's first published book, not fiction or biography, but a prayer book. And the father of our country, a one-on-one with George Washington? Those stories and more on this Independence Day special of EWTN News Nightly for Friday, July 3rd, 2015. Good evening. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm Brian Patrick with our One Nation Under God special for this Independence Day holiday. The 4th of July has been a federal holiday only since 1941, but the tradition of Independence Day dates back to the American Revolution in the 18th century. On July 4th, 1776, with the signing of the Declaration of Independence, the 13 English colonies claimed their independence from Great Britain. The event led to the formation of the United States of America. Each year, Americans remember the occasion celebrating Independence Day. We wouldn't continue to enjoy the freedom that we have without those who serve in our armed forces. Jason Calvi recently went to Arlington National Cemetery, visiting with soldiers who are remembering those who came before them.
1,000 soldiers on a special mission at Arlington National Cemetery to place an American flag near each headstone. These soldiers are all from the Army's Old Guard, a ceremonial regiment that dates back to 1948.
This needs to be done. This is something that we need to show our gratitude and know how much that we still care about them and that we're here for them.
Row after row of headstones, 228,000 here, but each one represents a real person with a family and cherished memories.
Kelly Griffith's brother Sammy was killed in Afghanistan in 2011.
Oh, he was hilarious.
She's now with TAPS, the Tragedy Assistance Program for Survivors.
It was just really nice to see him honored in that way and to know that our loved ones are not forgotten. For us at TAPS, every day is Memorial Day.
Private First Class Mason Bermudez is taking part in this tradition for the first time. His first flag is for his grandpa, a Vietnam vet.
He was a really top-notch guy. Always found him extremely great person in general. Everything about him was just awesome, and I really loved him.
Specialist Nicholas Connell's father died in Iraq in 2007.
So thankful that he was one of the ones that fought for my freedom as well as I am for my brothers and sisters, and I'm glad that I could follow in his footsteps.
And a promise that those footsteps will never be forgotten. In Arlington, Jason Calvi, EWTN News Nightly.
Thank you, Jason. As we celebrate the freedom to openly practice our faith, we remember other Christians who do not have that same freedom. We spoke recently with archaeologist Dr. Catherine Hansen about her work in Iraq and Syria.
Syria and Iraq are the heart of where civilization began. And you get everything from small mounded hill villages to standing Roman ruins. One of the things I've also seen recently, especially in the face of this ongoing crisis, is our colleagues, very brave colleagues on the ground, taking action and really standing up in support of each other. So, for example, there's a wonderful story from my colleagues at the Mara Museum in Syria, Muslim curators who live there in Mara now. They curate a collection at this museum that includes Byzantine Christian remains. And these are standing remains, a lot of artifacts that have crosses on them. And they were worried that ISIS or other groups would come and destroy them because there's crosses on them. So they took paper mache and they paper mache'd over them to make sure those objects would remain safe even if ISIS controls the area.
How brilliant, but how sad that these timeless relics, this history is being destroyed. What is the greater impact of this kind of destruction?
It's something that we're studying right now. One of the things that we've really seen happen is that when ISIS destroys a site, they don't just blow it up, they erase it. So it's exploded and then wiped clean. And that means that the local religious community, any of the ethnic minority religious communities there, have no place to have a site for mourning or have a site for remembrance. It disrupts the pattern of life and it disrupts the religious community.
Let's talk about the tomb of the prophet Jonah. We have satellite imagery detecting the damage there.
We do. The AAAS, the American Association for the Advancement of Sciences, did an analysis of this site. It's called Nebi Yunus locally, and it is the site where the prophet Jonah was buried. And that shrine to the tomb was destroyed by ISIS in July 2014. And then immediately after they blew it up, they brought in dump trucks and earth movers, and they wiped even the rubble away completely clean. So not only has the site been damaged, and there's no longer that shrine there, but all of the preceding temples and churches, that the remains of those that were buried underneath the ancient ones, those have also been destroyed.
Is there anything that the United States, that the world can and should do?
There's three things that we can do. One of them is to make sure that our humanitarian response includes protection of cultural and religious sites, so that we're also helping cultural heritage professionals. I'll be going back to Erbil, Iraq with colleagues of mine from the Smithsonian Institution and from the University of Pennsylvania to help train and work with our Iraqi colleagues. And we'll be also encouraging the American military forces there to make sure there's no accidental damage in their advisory capacity.
It was good to have Dr. Hansen with us. And while Americans have more freedom than many others, threats to our religious liberty are constantly growing. Here in D.C. alone, the Human Rights Amendment Act and the Reproductive Health Non-Discrimination Amendment Act could push Catholic companies to violate church teaching. Gloria Pervis of Black Catholics United for Life recently gave us her take on these alarming pieces of legislation. Gloria, clarify the concerns over these two pieces of legislation in D.C.
In a nutshell, Brian, it's really freedom from government coercion. Let me give you an example. When I graduated from college and I was looking for a job, I had a girlfriend say, you need a place where it's going to be a good fit. And I'm like, what's fit? And she said, you know, a place with mission, values, culture. Is it a good fit for you? And also, are you a good fit for them? That's all we're asking for, is that we can hire employees and retain employees and promote organizations that are a good fit for our mission, values, and culture. These laws say, no, you can't, simply because you're religiously affiliated.
And there are so many that take these freedom of religion concepts and confuse them with discrimination. What's the difference here?
Well, disagreement is not unjust discrimination. What is discriminatory is for the government to try to replace our morality with their own. There is nothing wrong with an organization wanting to hire people that have the right fit, mission, values, and culture. Nor would we expect a school to promote people that are teaching things contrary to what the school teaches. That's all we're asking for. Nothing else that any other regular organization or school would expect for themselves. The government is singling us out because we are religiously affiliated, because our mission, values, and culture align with that of a belief in God. And we're protected under the freedom of religion, freedom of speech, and freedom of association. And so those are our concerns, and that's the difference between unjust discrimination and disagreement.
We're seeing that debate that you referred to also in San Francisco, so it's coast to coast. So this isn't really just a local issue, although being here in D.C., there's some significance to that, being that this is the nation's capital.
And the eyes of the world are on us, and we should be looking at our Congress and the White House and saying, are you going to defend the Constitution? Is the Bill of Rights still important in the United States of America? The world's eyes are on us. And for those who are interested, there's also a hashtag free since 1791 for those of us who want to encourage Congress and the President to protect religious liberty in the nation's capital.
Do you think anyone's listening?
We'll see now, won't we? I know up above is, so we'll just have to see.
What would you encourage people to do other than what you just suggested?
Well, I think they need to become engaged and understand the importance of religious liberty, freedom of association, and freedom of speech, because this is just a harbinger for what's to come in the rest of the country. If our government does not stand up and protect the Constitution, we should expect more of these kinds of egregious violations against our freedoms to come in all the states and local legislatures.
Gloria visiting us here on EWTN News Nightly in April. Tonight, we also want to revisit St. Clements Island, which holds an intriguing chapter of freedom and faith in American history. That story from Mark Irons.
From this distance, it might not look like much, the little island behind me. But hundreds of years ago, the Catholic faith made a big landing there. Let's hop on a boat and take a closer look.
Visitors to this island in southern Maryland can make the trip without much trouble.
But in 1634, two ships from England made a dangerous voyage in search of religious liberty. Those passengers found it on these shores, naming the place St. Clements Island.
This is the birthplace of religious liberty in America.
It's the site of the very first Mass in the English-speaking colonies, and it was celebrated that same day those early colonists reached St. Clements Island. Leading the congregation that first Mass was Jesuit Father Andrew White.
In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit.
Fast forward 380 years to this week, a new congregation, some here descendants of those first colonists.
Masses out here are just really special.
In place of Father Andrew White, Cardinal Donald Worrell, and a Mass to commemorate 75 years of the Archdiocese of Washington while remembering the significance of this holy ground.
We come here simply to recognize the roots of our freedom, the roots of our heritage that we all take for granted today as Americans. And it was that first group of Catholic pilgrims who arrived that said, we're a free people, and that means freedom of religion.
That freedom brings a sense of pride to those who visit this island.
To stand on such holy ground here and know that we are so grateful to be Americans.
The people who came over from England, a long time ago, were starting something pretty wonderful. We're happy to kind of carry on their legacy.
God bless America.
Isn't it great to be on this little island?
A little island with a big history. Visitors may come and go, but the spirit of freedom and faith is here to stay. Mark Irons, EWTN News Nightly.
Coming up, a group of siblings prepare to perform for the Pope as he visits South America next week. And right next to the Declaration of Independence sits this historical prayer book. Thank you for joining us for our One Nation Under God special on this Independence Day holiday. I'm Brian Patrick. On Monday, Pope Francis leaves Rome for South America. Now, during his trip, the Holy Father will visit Ecuador, Bolivia, and Paraguay. Catherine Zeltner introduces us to a family preparing for his visit.
These siblings are in perfect harmony. Gabriela, Joaquin, and Jasmine Santiago will sing at a Mass celebrated by Pope Francis in Paraguay this July. The sisters have performed for a pope before, singing for St. John Paul II during his 1988 papal visit.
I have the opportunity again to be close to a representative of Christ in our country, but I ask, why me? I am just like any other person.
But this is younger brother Joaquin's first time singing for a pontiff. The siblings are part of a choir that's 500 members strong. The Santiagos believe it's a chance to share the gifts God gave them.
It makes you so happy. It's very emotional.
The choir director says all of God's people are represented in this singing group.
We have people ranging from 15 years of age to 82. We have people with disabilities in the choir. We have blind people, those with different types of disabilities.
500 different voices lifting up praise to one God. Catherine Zeltner, EWTN News Nightly.
The Pope is in for a treat. Well, on this holiday weekend, we reflect a lot on our American history. The first book printed in what is now the United States wasn't a work of fiction. It wasn't a biography. As Jason Calvi reports, it was a prayer book, and more specifically, a book of Psalms.
A new exhibit at the Library of Congress features an original Declaration of Independence and other colonial works. But they're not the headliners. These twins are. 2 copies of the first English book printed in the New World in 1640. The Book of Psalms were translated into English for singing during the liturgy. It's known as the Bay Psalm Book.
They're in the wilderness of Massachusetts, and the fact that their religion and their need to preserve that religion is so strong that they actually print this book, I think, is a phenomenal opening moment for American printing.
The exhibit tells the story of that early history. Here's the first complete Bible printed in the Western Hemisphere, the Elliott Indian Bible of the 1660s.
It's a very important contribution on the part of Eliot to transcribe the Bible into what was only a spoken language. So he's put Algonquin on the page.
The exhibit walks you through the history of printing in the colonies leading up to the Declaration of Independence. This one behind me is one of 26 of the originals still around.
The electricity of the announcement spreads through the colonies. And it's because you've all gotten on horseback with your copy. You stop in every town. It's read from the steps of the courthouse. Somebody writes it down. You get back on your horse and you go.
It's a story of American Revolution in printing. And the first chapter begins with a book of Psalms. In Washington, Jason Calvi, EWTN News Nightly.
I find that fascinating. On a lighter side tonight, during the summer, of course, there's nothing more American than baseball. Well, now a baseball museum hopes to draw a new crowd. A museum dedicated to an iconic baseball bat has a new heavy hitter.
This is probably our most ambitious exhibit to date.
The Louisville Slugger Museum is all about baseball history, but now Superman and Batman are on deck.
We really wanted it to feel like you were walking in to an amazing comic book.
The exhibit is built around pop culture cards from Topps, the baseball card company. There's lightsabers and superhero collectibles like the original Batman suit from the goofy 60s TV show.
Would you like to make a little wager? I never gamble.
We have really learned over the years that when we can do special exhibits that broaden, it does draw in people who might not typically come to visit us.
Pop culture collector John Azarian lent many of his own items to the museum.
So when I was a kid, my favorite TV show was Batman. Of course, my favorite part of the show was watching the fight scenes, especially when they had the words pop up on the screen.
Azarian says he wants to share his love for the glorified vigilante with children and adults alike, hoping it sparks a new interest for those who take a look.
These shows were part of my childhood, so they're very emotional and nostalgic for me.
Paul Van Dyke, visiting the museum, tells us he was a fan of the original Batman. He says his childhood heroes look a lot different when you're all grown up.
But in the case of the Batman stuff, that was campy when it was there. It's campier now because, yeah, it's just pajamas.
Those pajamas, an original piece of the past which shaped countless imaginations from comic books to TV. Up next, honoring those who served the cause of freedom more than 7 decades ago. And getting to know our first commander-in-chief who courageously fought for independence. We pray that all of your families are enjoying a safe and happy holiday weekend. Thank you for joining us this evening for our One Nation Under God Independence Day special. I'm Brian Patrick for the EWTN News Nightly team. Celebrating America this weekend, we remember the many who gave their lives that we may live free. Nebraska U.S. Representative Jeff Fortenberry tells us why he recently visited the beaches of Normandy, France, the site of the D-Day invasion 7 decades ago.
Because it's so important that we as a nation, that we collectively continue to remember what the greatest generation did. And more specifically, too, I was extraordinarily privileged and honored to present on Utah Beach in France a memorial built by the little prairie town of Columbus, Nebraska, which honors a native son, Andrew Jackson Higgins. It's a reproduction of the Higgins boat, the troop carrier boat that landed that day on D-Day, and several statues of the troops storming off. The French government was so interested, so welcoming to this idea that they actually placed the monument, the new memorial, in the very breach where our troops stormed through in the first wave on Utah Beach, led by General Theodore Roosevelt, who was the son of President Roosevelt. Theodore Roosevelt, General Roosevelt, died 1 month later in Normandy, is buried there at Omaha Cemetery, where 10,000 Americans are buried. And he is buried next to his little brother, who died in World War I. So what an American story that you have a president who gave 2 sons to 2 great wars buried next to one another.
But this first wave, almost no one survived.
It was horrific. Fortunately, on Utah Beach, they did not land where they were supposed to. The drift took them into this breach area where the German reinforcements were a little bit lighter. But nonetheless, they had to make their way across that beach in the storm of bullets and mortar rounds. Particularly on Omaha Beach, where the fighting was even more grievous, we lost a whole lot of lives. So the memorial that Columbus, Nebraska built in my district. Again, a little prairie town where the first settlers moved through on their journey to build new lives west. It really is a memorial to life. The lives of the soldiers who fought and died there that day, in honor of the lives of the veterans who are still with us, but really in honor of all the lives of the greatest generation who did so much to build this country.
There's so few left in that greatest generation. How can we keep what they did for the world, for freedom, alive?
One gentleman told me on the 70th anniversary, he said, "I haven't been here in 70 years. Much better reception this time." Incredible stories. So many soldiers who fought and are still with us. When they came back home, they went right back to work. They raised their families, did their duties, were good participants in civic life, and never really told their story. So I think something good has happened. In the last few years, members throughout America, citizens, have been encouraging their relatives to tell the story. The Library of Congress has a veteran history project. Any veteran can record their story into perpetuity. We'll reserve it here in the archives. We'll give a copy to the family if they so want. But it was that generation that not only fought off the forces of totalitarianism and fascism, they beat back the horrific economic malaise of the Great Depression, then came home to a new Cold War where they had to take on communism, which murdered and deprived liberty of millions, hundreds of millions of people throughout the world. And then we had our own fight internally within our country that the greatest generation had to solve, the fight for civil rights, to protect the dignity and rights of all Americans. So this monument, again, has many levels of meaning. First of all, to the troops who fought and died. It was a particular honor for me to be there. My own grandfather was killed, not on D-Day, but in November of 1944 in that area in Normandy, and buried at a little town called Saint-Mary-Église, which is where our paratroopers landed the night before in the midst of the German column.
Courageous men and women.
It's really incredible.
Congressman Fortenberry, a great friend. Good to have him with us earlier this month. And the American Revolution was led by the Continental Army's Commander-in-Chief. Wyatt Goolsbee joined the many visitors to George Washington's Mount Vernon home this past President's Day.
In honor of his 283rd birthday, members of the U.S. military place a wreath inside George Washington's tomb in Virginia, a sign of respect for a man who set the standard for the American president. At his Mount Vernon home, visitors were treated to patriotic music and military performances. Today, President's Day, is Mount Vernon's single busiest day of the year. The estate hosts thousands who tour the grounds and participate in programs all aimed at taking visitors back to the late 18th century.
It's very important for us to create that sense of authenticity, that sense of place, to really give people a sense of what it was like in early America, the world that Washington lived in.
That means close attention to detail, whether it's the buildings and shops or the actors in period costumes.
The characters walking around the ground tell stories that would have been current to his time. If you try to bring them into our world, they try to push you back and remind you that they are living in 1799, and what you know today may be very different from what they know.
No better example of that than General Washington himself, who refused to break character even when I asked him about his birthday.
How old are you going to be now? Well, I'm well into my 60s, sir. How old are you?
Well, luckily I'm just 30, so I'm not quite there yet.
I have boots older than you.
The general even opened up about his childhood.
We've been hearing this rumor that you chopped down a cherry tree. It never happened. It's a myth. There is a fellow who wrote a story about me, and he doesn't know a lick about my childhood. And so he made up this story. But he was trying to teach a story, and I do believe that honesty is the best policy.
And for all the people who celebrate George Washington, it's good to know the first president was always honest and respectful to visitors at his home, virtues that Americans still hold dear to this day.
I guess we bow since we're in Virginia. We bow, sir.
In Virginia, Wyatt Goolsbee, EWTN News Nightly.
It's hard to say who's more amusing, the George character or that Wyatt character. Interesting, too, to look back to mid-February, how cold it was now that it's so hot. Until Monday, like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter, watch again on EWTN's YouTube page. For the EWTN News Nightly team, I'm Brian Patrick. Thanks for watching our One Nation Under God special as we leave you with snapshots of 4th of July celebrations across this great land. Good night and God bless America.